Yes, I'm still alive.
And I'm back with the next episode of the visual novel series. It's been a while, been pretty busy lately, getting certified in the IT field. I've been taking all sorts of exams, and consequently, it's been a little over a month since my last post. So, here we are today. Now, in light of that delay, I've set up a Discord server for you guys so that way you'll always be in the know about what's going on. That has been a request, after all. So, the server has 3 channels you can connect with. There's the general channel, and that channel is for anything related to Unity. This is where you can communicate with other members who may join the server and get feedback on different topics that concern or interest you. If you want to communicate directly with me, then you'll want to visit the question and answer channel. This is the channel that I'll be most likely to respond to since, well, YouTube doesn't always notify me of people's comments, so posting your question here will be a little more reliable, and I'll do my best to answer you guys in a timely manner. Last is the news and update channel. This will be for posting updates and announcements concerning my YouTube channel, so you'll know upcoming videos and plans, as well as any delays if they come along, so you won't be left in the dark anymore. Now if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, then the link for joining the server will be in the description. Now let's go ahead and get down to business. This episode is about saving and loading within our visual novel. As you know, when you read a book, you place a bookmark in it to mark your progress, so you can continue at any time you want. The same should be done for a visual novel, but in this case it's a digital bookmark. But of course it's not just as simple as marking the page and paragraph we might be on, because we've got a lot more information on screen other than the characters you're reading. We've got all kinds of visual and audible elements that we need to bookmark as well. Just to name a few things we might need to save, we've got the chapter file, the chapter progress, background images, music, characters and all their traits, as well as the dialogue on screen. But first we need something to save, so we need a story. So I threw together a quick story following the plot last set in our dynamic story video. That was coming out of the tongue real weird. Yeah, you know, the one about the monkey needing its face tickled, that thing. So I went ahead and just went along with that, turned it into a short dialogue-focused story following 2 characters who were looking for this monkey to save the world. The story consists of 5 chapter files that are interconnected with the load commands. Each chapter is populated with the commands we created up to this point, and they're very small chapter files, and they are easy to write as well. Each chapter has a bit of dialogue and character events, and they each lead to the next chapter until the 3rd chapter gives a choice at the end, giving us alternate endings. This all works just fine when I play it in Unity, of course. You can see I'm using the backgrounds and music, and I've even got 2 characters talking to each other in this scene. The chapter soon comes to a close and transitions out, when it then links to the 2nd chapter and immediately continues the story. This changes the background and music, and eventually introduces a 3rd character. Looks pretty good, right? But there is a problem, and that's that I can't save my progress, so if I want to finish the story, then I obviously need to finish it in one sitting, or I can take the time to implement saving and loading. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. I want you to go ahead and make sure you've got a number of chapter files to compose a short story, using the characters you've imported into Unity. Open your command file if you get stuck on events, and just make a little quick story. Once you have your short story, I'll see you in Unity. Let's get started by adding a new class to our scripts to hold the data we need to save for each bookmark. I'm going to place this in a save and load folder, and call it something like my, let's say a save file. Actually, I'm going to make that game file instead. Now this is a savable class, so we won't need to place it on any object. That means we don't need it to be a monobehavior. We do, however, need it to be serializable, that way we can save it later without risking any hiccups. Get rid of start and update, and let's give it 2 variables, a string for the name of the chapter file we're reading from, and an integer representing our progress inside of that chapter. Then open up the novel controller so we can add saving and loading to it. In Start, we're loading a chapter file, so let's get rid of that because we want to load a game file instead, or a bookmark. To do that, make a function that'll load our game file. Game files are going to be stored in incremental slots on the main menu, and you can just click them to load them, so let's give this function an integer parameter. Store the file path in a string like this, and make sure the file exists before we try to load it. We can verify this through the system.io.file class. As a best practice, make sure that you include the file extension in your file path. I think it's necessary, but I'm not entirely sure. And let's change this case so we're checking if it doesn't exist rather than if it does. That way we can create it and then load without another check. If it doesn't exist, then we should use the built-in function of our file manager called SaveJSON, which will save a class to file. The class we want to save is a blank game file. To make it easier on ourselves, let's go into the GameFile class and make an initialization that'll pre-fill some variables for us when a new instance is created. We should make sure that the chapter file becomes equal to the name of our first chapter file in the story. This is the name of my first chapter, and I can verify by looking in Atom where I originally wrote the files. Setting the chapter to that name will ensure that we load our story from the beginning when we start a new game. Next, I just want to make sure the chapter progress is at a default of 0. With that taken care of, we now have our new game, and it can be created and going in to be saved in JSON format. So our next goal is to load it whether we created it or if it already exists. Do this with File Manager's load.json function and cast the output in the class holding our data. Next, we need to start up the chapter contained in the file. We can do it just like we did with our original load chapter file function, just using the name. In fact, let's just copy everything and paste it after we load the file above. Replace file name here with the chapter name inside of our game file. And it looks like we're going to need to save the last speaker as well. So in the game file, let's just add a string for that. Then assign it to what was saved in the file. So below that, we see that it's going to start the chapter file, and we'll be able to progress through it like normal in that coroutine, but we also save our chapter progress, so let's load that in beforehand as well. Make sure that we set the controller's progress to the progress saved on file. And I don't necessarily want this to continue to the next line automatically. In fact, I don't want that, so I'm going to remove that line. Now, we also need the current dialog on the screen, but we'll worry about that in a second. Right now we've got a decent script going, so we should have a default file saved when we first launch the game. So let's make sure we call to load the game file in slot 0 at start, and make sure that happens in Unity. So the console shows that we did indeed save a file. That's good. Refresh by going out and coming back into Unity, and we should be able to see the new file, as well as the directory if it was created. And there it is. You can even see the specific variables we saved just by reading it in the inspector. Now that's not secure, so we'll be doing some encryption later, but let's just start simple. Now we can load basic information, let's save that information. So make a save function below the load function right here. This doesn't need a parameter because it's going to use the game file open from the last load. We'll need the file path, of course, and to do that, we need the number of the file that was loaded. So I think I should cache the game file number from the last load into a private integer above. And I'll just set that value inside of the load function. So whenever we load a new file, that number is going to be updated, and we can be sure we're saving the right thing. To the right file, of course. So now copy the file path from load into save, and replace the number with the cached number. And we can save it just like we did above, only don't save a new game file, save the one that's already open. Actually, come to think of it, I might need a reference to do that, won't I? Yeah, okay, so I need to make a reference above before we can save anything. Cut that right there, change that to number, change anything else that use that number, and make our reference up here. So now when we load the game file, I'll load it into that reference instead. There. Then we can go into the save function and make sure we save the referenced game file. Change that reference to be the number and not the file. And that looks pretty good. Now make sure you change the names up here since we changed the variable names. Everything needs to match, otherwise we will have problems. And now we need to make this call. We need to call the save function so we can see it work. And I'm going to go into the update function to do that and say that if I press the S key, then I'm going to save the game. Just for testing, we'll actually have a button for this later. We'll have a whole menu layout. Go back into the save function and let's update our variables. First, set the progress on file to the progress cached in our controller so we can start at the same point in the chapter each time. Also add a string to hold the currently loaded chapter name as well, since we want to update that too. And in each load function for both the game file as well as the individual chapter file loading, make sure you update that string to match the latest file name that was opened. Now we can assign that variable to the game file in our save command. Next, save the cached last known speaker, because we always need that when no speaker is specified in a dialog line. After that, we need 2 more strings in our game file. One for the name of the current speaker, which will almost always be the cached last speaker, but I'm saving it anyway in case I make some specific alteration later. And we also need the current dialogue on the screen. Save should end up looking like this. And then we're going to use an open command from the dialog system in the load function, as you can see in the middle of the screen. It hasn't been created yet, but it'll instantly set the text on screen without needing to build it first, so go ahead and write that line in. A problem exists, though. In dialog system's close function, when the speech panel becomes invisible, the whole object and all of its children become inactive. This means that our clickable trigger to advance chapter files also becomes disabled, so we should actually disable everything except for that click field. But since placement in the hierarchy is important, I can't just unparent it. It has to be where it is, so my best option is to make an array of objects to enable and disable when I open and close the speech panel. That way the click field is always active. I've done this with a game object array beneath the elements of the dialog system class. Then I just disable every object in that array in the close command. After that, I placed every child of the speech panel inside that array, with exception of the click field. Then I made a reference to the speech box in the dialog system, which is the parent of the dialog text, and set an isClosed boolean to the visibility of that box. So if the dialog is not visible, it assumes the speech panel is closed. I also made a command to show or hide all objects in the array depending on a boolean passed in, so I can replace the iteration used in close with this. And then the command we used in loading the game file is right here, the open command for the dialog system, which takes in a speaker and dialog and instantly places it on screen, showing all elements of the speech panel in the process. Just so you remember what I'm talking about, it's the command we hadn't created at the time inside of the load game file function in the Novel controller. So when you launch the VN, you should see the character show up, the background, the music, but the dialogue might be cut off for the very first line. If that happens for you, and even if it doesn't, go into the text architect and add a false boolean parameter to the force mesh update calls inside of the construction coroutine. This will force the mesh to update even when it may not be active in the scene when our panel is closed. Talking about TextMesh Pro here. And one more thing to add to this barrage, we need to change the placement of our progress assignment in the load game file function of our Novel controller. When handle line coroutine begins, the progress is set to 0, so we need to apply the saved progress after the coroutine starts in order for it to really take effect. Cross your fingers, hope all is well, and hit play. And it looks like my visual novel is working right now. It's behaving as it should. I just need to test out the saving portion now. Let me hit the S key, Okay, so console tells me we saved a file, so I can go ahead and quit and come back in now. See, we're good. Says saved one line. Alright, and now let's check that out. Let's just look at that file for a moment. Okay, I've got the correct chapter file saved, but now see how the progress is saved to 6 instead of 0? It's also got the speaker and dialogue saved, so that's good as well. Okay, we start back, and it's got the right dialogue and speaker name displayed. I like to see that. And when I click, it continues from where it left off in the story, but it's missing a lot of stuff. For instance, the music stopped, the background is gone, and both characters were gone when I loaded. The good news is, it's super easy and quick to save all of that stuff as well. We just need to jump back into our game file. Let's start with the characters first. We need to save a lot of information for each character, so I'm making a serializable subclass called character data. Inside, let's store the name of the character being saved. Let's also save the name of the face and body expression images so we can load their poses back. But since my characters can flip, I also want to save their direction as a boolean. True if they're facing left and false if they're facing right. Then I also save the position as a string so we can return the characters to their proper position when loading. Now in the actual file, I need a list of all these characters. And when we create a new game file, we should make sure this character list is set to a new list. Doing this, we can save the state of every character present in the scene in our visual novel. To make it easier to get this data, I'll make an initialization for the character data that takes a character as a parameter, and it'll just gather the data directly from the character provided. I also happen to remember that we don't need to store the position as a string. We can actually store it as a vector too, which will be much easier. I was just doing a string because that's how I used to save values like that before I started using JSON. It's a lot easier the other way. But the position currently isn't available to us, so enter the character class and come down to where we store the target position near our move command. The target position, whether we set or move towards it, is the final position of our character in their current event. You can see it assigned in our set position command, as well as the move command. So clearly, this is the value that we want to retrieve and save in the game file. But I don't want to expose this variable for manipulation, so instead I'll add a public retrieval variable for it, called _target position. Now get that value to store as our character position. Now we can get each character in the scene using our character manager and store their stats in that list. And that will store all of our characters inside of the game file. Back in the load function, it's time to load our saved characters back into the scene. This one is going to be a bit longer than saving them, but still very easy. Start off the same by iterating through every character in the saved list. Then we want to create the character. If you'll notice, we've got an optional boolean to enable the characters on start or not. This is useful for keeping characters hidden when they're supposed to be. In order to make use of that, we need an enable boolean in our character data that'll tell us whether to keep the character visible or not. Next, we set the body and face of the characters. And then the position, which I'm just going to load as 0 for right now. Next, I want to make sure the character is facing the right way, so I'll check if facing left is true and make them face left if so. Otherwise, the character will face right. And like I said, the position doesn't have to be a string, it can be stored directly as a vector, so make sure it's set as a vector in the game file. So this way we can simply call the set position and use the saved vector to place the character in their right position. Anytime we make a change to the game file, we need to delete the existing one because its format will no longer be valid. And now let's hit play. Let's get around to the same point where we've got two characters on screen, and then I'm going to save it. Okay, right there is good. Console says we saved, so we can exit now. It saved our game file, and this time we should have some characters saved in it. See all that new information at the bottom? You can see my file now has data about Raylene and Gwen, so let's start that back up. That's sweet, they're both in the scene. And you'll notice they're in the same positions they were in when I saved it. They also have the same body and facial expressions, which is terrific. I can click, and the story continues where it left off, as it should. Everything looks good, except for the fact that I'm missing the background and the music as well. So let's enter the game file again and make a texture reference for each of our image layers. I've got the background and cinematic, as well as the foreground to worry about, so I need 3 textures there. Then I need to save the texture assigned to the renderers on each layer inside of the save function. As well as saving the layer images, I also want to save the music being played by the music manager. So let's make an audio clip for our game file to hold the music that should be playing. You can also do this if you have ambience going on, but you'll probably want a separate controller for that. And in the save function, save that variable as the music handler's active songs clip. And to be on the safe side, only do that if the active song is not null. If it is null, then save the value as nothing. Then come to the load function, and let's bring all of that stuff back into the scene. Let's start by bringing up the images in each layer if they're not empty. After that, let's load in the music if it's not null. It's also worth mentioning that an error could occur if there's no image on any of these layers, because then we'd be trying to save the texture of a raw image that doesn't exist. So just like we did for music, we need to do a null check before we save anything. Now let's save at the same part. Exit out, come back in, reload that file. And now you can see the images and the music saved in the file. So we should be able to load everything back in working order on the next start. Let's try that. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. See, I told you that'd be easy. Now, I know there's probably someone who's not getting their expected results, in which case you can find the project packaged in the description. I'm always going to do that for you guys. And I just saved again. Let's see that take effect. Alright, looking good, very good. Our saving and loading is working like perfect. Now just imagine multiple save files and accessing them through a main menu. This is the foundation for doing exactly that. So what I'm going to do now is progress to the second chapter and save, then watch the novel pick up from the second chapter instead of the first. I already know it's going to work, but I guess I'm just in the stage of admiring the progress we've made. I just love how everything's coming together. So go ahead and give yourself a pat on the back, because you are now this much closer to making your visual novel, and that is something to be proud of. Alright, here we are in Chapter 2. Notice the change in scenery and music. That is key to recognizing the first from the second chapter. And like I said earlier, it also introduces a third character, so we can also see how we're unlimited in the number of characters we can save to a file. There's Mako, so I can save about right here. So, yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna save where Gwen is talking right here. There we are. Let's reload that and check it out. Our chapter has changed in the game file. That is crucial. So is the character list. We've now got 3 characters in there, just like we need. So let's launch this back up. Awesome. Exactly where we left off. Ain't that nice? But I get the feeling that we're going to have a problem here shortly when the characters exit the scene. And I say that because characters that go invisible, they don't really go invisible, they just use an alpha image, and yet we're always reloading the last sprite from their character sheet, which doesn't have that alpha image. So my guess is when I reload a character who becomes invisible, I'm either going to get an error or the character images are going to be solid blue boxes. Let's see, all of them have exited here, but specifically Mako is who I'll be looking for. Let's go ahead and save and just test my theory. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. Yeah, okay, that's kind of weird. Mako's missing her face. But check out Gwen on the right. She indeed became a big blue box because it can't find her renderer images because exiting set her images to the external alpha texture. And that is not in her character sheet. That's where we're trying to load everything from. So to fix that, we need to come to the character class. I'm making a boolean called isVisible, which will be set when the character enters or exits a scene. I may decide to remove the character when they finish exiting, and that would alleviate the problem, but for now they just maintain alpha textures. You'll notice I'm making a public and private variant. The private one is what I want to change in the class, and the public one is what I'm going to turn into a retrieval variable that just fetches this value for external classes, specifically the game file when it saves the character. Now I need to assign this value. When the character fades out, this boolean becomes false. That means she won't be enabled on start. And when they fade in, it will become true, which means they will be enabled on start when the character is reloaded in the scene. Also, when the character is first created, this value should become equal to whatever the value is set for the enable on start boolean, since that determines visibility as well. And in the game file, when we get a character's data, set the enabled boolean to the isVisible from that character. And back in the character, there's another thing we need to do. Whenever we enable the character, we need to set the visibility boolean to equal its enabled value, which actually means we don't need to assign visibility in the initialization call below, but whatever, no harm done. That will make sure visibility is updated whenever we change this enabled value. Now let's scroll all the way down to the bottom to do something here. Here we are. In the fade function, fade in, only set visibility to true if it falls within the if statement, because that's the only time that anything changes in there. In fade out, you notice how we retrieve an alpha texture to transition to. This is what we need to load when the character sprites are set to alpha only. So copy this line and bring it up top. In here to our set expression and set body functions, only the ones using a string parameter. If the string is named alpha only, then paste the line we copied and pass the loaded alpha texture into the set functions that use a sprite as the parameter. There we go. So with all that out of the way, we now have a working save and load system in our visual novel. This here is a big step. Next episode, we're going to encrypt the save data and make our main menu. So have fun, and I will talk to you guys later.